Good afternoon. It's currently 39 degrees in Eau Claire, and I checked, it's 40 in Duluth and 40 in Hayward. So this is the northwest quadrant of the state version. Just thought I'd give you a nice weather update. Looks like we will have spring just around the corner. Hello, my name is Martin Hansen, and I'm a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE for short, the Wisconsin section. This presentation today is being brought to you by the ASCE Wisconsin section and the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. We're pleased that you've taken time to attend our Invest in Wisconsin infrastructure event, and we hope you find this information in this presentation enlightening. Our event today has three parts. We have two formal presentations. First, on the recently released 2020 ASCE Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card. And second, comments on infrastructure spending in the state and national economy. And third, we will have a question and answer period with the presenters and an invited panel of guests from ASCE Wisconsin Report Card Committee and the League of Women Voters. But first, a couple words about logistics for today's event. We are using the Zoom webinar platform, so all attendees are currently muted. We will be using the Zoom Q&A feature to take questions, not the Zoom chat box that some of you may be more familiar with. The Q&A feature should be visible in the Zoom screen menu, and depending on your device, you may need to scroll your mouse over the top or bottom of your Zoom window or tap the screen on your tablet to bring up the Zoom screen menu. If you'd like to ask questions, you may enter your questions in the Q&A box at any time during the webinar. We will have time at the end of the presentations to address those and any other new questions that come up. This event is being recorded and will be made available on the ASCE Wisconsin section YouTube channel. So let's begin. What do we really mean by infrastructure anyway? It's a somewhat simple word, but it includes a variety of extremely important things we depend on and oftentimes take for granted. It's the power generation and transmission system that charged your phone last night. It's the water and sewer system that delivered your clean water and took away the dirty water when you got ready to start your day. It's the roads and bridges and perhaps transit that may have helped you get to your destinations today or tonight. It's the waterway, ports, rails, and airports that helped get your online orders delivered to you and products to your stores today. It's the landfills that collected your waste this week, and it's a lot more, but I think you get the point that multiple segments of infrastructure impact your life many times a day. Today, we'll hear from two experts. Our first presentation will overview the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card prepared by ASCE Wisconsin. And the second presentation will explore how infrastructure spending impacts the local and national economy. Finally, as mentioned previously, we will have time for questions for our speakers and panel. So who is ASCE and what do they do? To answer those questions, I'd like to introduce Carl Sutter, ASCE Director, who will brief you on ASCE and the ASCE Wisconsin section. Carl?
Thank you, Marty. The American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE, is the oldest professional engineering organization in the United States. It is a not-for-profit society and was founded in 1852 in New York City. It is worldwide with over 150,000 members in 177 countries. It also consists of 9 institutes which specialize in specific areas of civil engineering. These institutes are architectural engineering, coasts, oceans, ports, and rivers, construction, engineering mechanics, environmental and water resources, geotechnical, structural, transportation and development, and utility engineering and surveying. The Wisconsin section of ASCE was established in 1923. It comprises most of the state with the exception of the area near Superior and consists of 4 branches and 1,886 members. I would like to mention that the report card we will be referring to today does encompass all of Wisconsin, including the area near Superior. ASCE works to raise awareness of the need to maintain and modernize the nation's infrastructure using sustainable and resilient practices, advocates for increasing and optimizing investment in infrastructure, and improved knowledge and competency. Civil engineers are global leaders building a better quality of life. Our society mission is to provide essential value to our members and partners, advance civil engineering, and serve the public good. Our code of ethics lists that engineers, first and foremost, protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. This presentation is part of our advocacy and education effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Next, I'd like to introduce Louise Petering from the League of Women Voters, who will introduce her organization to you. Louise?
Thank you, Marty. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Louise Petering, League of Women Voters of Wisconsin Board President. The League is pleased to join the ASCE Wisconsin section in this project to educate Wisconsin citizens about their 2020 assessment of our state's infrastructure. The League recognizes that the entire US population of over 330 million people depends on our nation's infrastructure, regardless of whether among the 80% living in urban areas or the 20% living elsewhere. We recognize all of us need energy, water, transportation, and much more to support our lives. Everyone, citizens, communities, and businesses, absolutely everyone needs a fully functioning and well-maintained infrastructure to support our economy and provide us all with a high quality of life. Next. The League of Women Voters is characterized by 2 policies. One, our nonpartisanship, and the other, our inclusivity. We do not support political parties or candidates, nor do we oppose them. We do support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and both of these policies can be found on our website. In addition to those policies, we are a multi-issue organization. We have issue positions on various aspects of government, social policy, and natural resources. All were established after study and member agreement or consensus. All of our positions serve the public interest, as should our infrastructure. National and state issue positions may also be found on our respective websites. In addition to being multi-issue, we are political. And though we are nonpartisan, we do advocate and base our advocacy on our established issue positions. We have been doing that since our founding about 101 years ago. Next. Here you see a map of Wisconsin showing our local leagues. We are a statewide organization, nonprofit, with almost 3,000 members throughout the state. Next. Along with the ASCE, we offered the future meetings shown here. Details will follow near the end of today's webinar. Next.
Thank you, Louise. Our first presenter today is Carl Sutter. Carl is a senior vice president at McMahon Associates in Neenah, Wisconsin. Carl has been and currently is very active at ASCE, having served in a number of local, state, and national offices, and is currently serving as a region director. Carl will give us an overview of the 2020 infrastructure report card that was released in September of 2020.
Attending the American Society of Civil Engineers presentation of the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card in conjunction with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. This report card was prepared by over 35 volunteer civil engineers. I'm going to review this rather quickly so you can get an overview of where we currently stand as a state. ASCE has assessed Wisconsin's infrastructure and it earned an overall grade of C, a mediocre grade. We can do better, and we strive to reach a B grade. Some of our recommendations to increase this grade include increase overall investment across all infrastructure sectors to ensure safe, resilient, and reliable systems to maintain and improve the quality of life and economic health for Wisconsin residents. Leadership at all levels must have targeted discussions and build consensus to facilitate necessary updates for outdated infrastructure based on the needs of Wisconsinites. Along with increased investments, efficiencies, and new technologies can help bridge the gap between smart investment and overall infrastructure needs. Encourage new methods of design and construction and defray costs while providing for a better future for Wisconsin. Project priorities should be set for investment in the state's most outdated and overcapacity infrastructure needs. And please remember that delayed improvement and maintenance results in greater costs in the long run. This slide depicts the 13 infrastructure categories that we evaluated to provide the C grade. As you can see, the grades range from a high of B for energy to a low of D+ for roads and transit. The grading criteria is the same as in the old style school report card. Each category is graded on capacity. Does the infrastructure's capacity meet current and future needs? Condition. What is the infrastructure's existing and near future physical condition? Funding. What is the current level of funding from all levels of the infrastructure category as compared to the estimated need? Future need. What is the cost to improve the infrastructure? Will future funding prospects address the need? Operation and maintenance. What is the owner's ability to operate and maintain the infrastructure properly? Is the infrastructure in compliance with government regulations? Public safety. To what extent is the public safety jeopardized by the condition of the infrastructure, and what could be the consequences of failure? Resilience. What is the infrastructure system's capacity to prevent or protect against significant multi-hazard threats and incidents? How able is it to quickly recover and reconstitute critical services with minimum consequences for public health and safety, the economy, and national security? Innovation. What new and innovative techniques, materials, technologies, and delivery methods are being implemented to improve the infrastructure? The grading scale is as follows. A, exceptional, fit for the future. The infrastructure in the system or network is generally in excellent condition, typically new or recently rehabilitated, and meets capacity needs for the future. A few elements show signs of general deterioration that require attention. Facilities meet modern standards for functionality and are resilient to withstand most disasters and severe weather events. B, good, adequate for now. The infrastructure in the system or network is in good to excellent condition. Some elements show signs of general deterioration that require attention. A few elements exhibit significant deficiencies. Safe and reliable with minimal capacity issues and minimal risk. C, mediocre, requires attention. The infrastructure in the system or network is in fair to good condition. It shows general signs of deterioration and requires attention. Some elements exhibit significant deficiencies in conditions and functionality with increasing vulnerability to risk. D, poor, at risk. The infrastructure is in poor to fair condition and mostly below standard, with many elements approaching the end of their service life.
A large portion of the system exhibits significant deterioration. Condition and capacity are of significant concern with strong risk of failure. F, failing, critical, unfit for purpose. The infrastructure in the system is in unacceptable condition with widespread signs of deterioration. Many of the components of the system exhibit signs of imminent failure. Now, let's review the individual categories. Aviation is an integral part of Wisconsin's transportation system, moving people and goods throughout the state, nation, and world. We have 8 commercial airports and 90 general aviation airports. Recently, commercial airlines transported more than 5.5 million passengers annually to and from Wisconsin. In general, Wisconsin's commercial aviation airports meet or exceed standards. 90% of airport pavement on primary runways and taxiways are rated fair or above. In the most recent 5-year capital improvement plan, Wisconsin's airports have identified a need of $1.13 billion from 2019 to 2025. Airport owners need to be able to finance a portion of their projects, find new revenue options, and utilize reliable, robust federal funding to meet future needs. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we propose the following to raise the grade in aviation. Increase federal and state funding to allow for new pavement and maintenance to be reliably scheduled. Investigate the resilience of the Wisconsin aviation system in the wake of more frequent and severe weather events, such as flooding and snowstorms. Plan to have the Wisconsin State Airport System Plan completed or updated on a regular basis to ensure that the state airports stay on top of any necessary changes. Bridges. Wisconsin's 14,275 bridges provide the state with critical infrastructure connecting residents with their jobs, schools, businesses, and places of worship, as well as hospitals and other emergency response services. 7.4% of our bridges are structurally deficient. The national average is 7.6%. That means we still have over 1,000 bridges that are structurally deficient. A 2019 report by the American Road and Transportation Builders Association identifies 1,955 bridges that require repair with an estimated cost of $1.4 billion. Developing policy solution and alternative project delivery methods, as well as utilizing advanced high-performance materials for bridge construction and repair to assist with cost savings are all crucial steps. Finally, the state should utilize Wisconsin's asset management system to increase bridge restoration efforts. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE proposes the following to raise the grade. Continue use of advanced materials for bridge rehabilitation and for new bridges. These include high-performance concrete and epoxy-coated and stainless steel reinforcement. Dams. Dams in Wisconsin provide recreational areas, fish and other wildlife habitat, hydroelectric power, a water source for agricultural operations, navigation, wetland restoration, and flood control. We have approximately 3,900 dams, of which nearly 200 are high hazard dams, meaning probable loss of life should the dam fail. The annual Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources budget for dam safety is approximately $750,000, which allows for 6.25 full-time equivalent staff. However, increased resources are needed to ensure public safety and minimize economic impact from possible future dam failures. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we propose the following to raise the grade in dams. Educate the public about the location and the safety risk and hazard associated with the dams. Drinking water. Wisconsin has more than 11,000 public water systems to serve residents, which is among the largest amount in the nation. More than 80% of these are in areas where people don't remain for long periods, such as campgrounds or gas stations, while 5% serve more than 4 million residents. In general, municipalities and water utilities are encountering several natural and man-made water quality issues and must contend with aging water treatment and distribution systems to serve their communities in the future. Lead, bacteria, nitrates, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, arsenic, and radium are some of the water quality concerns that have come to light in recent years. It is estimated that $8.6 billion will be needed to address infrastructure deficiencies over the next 2 decades. Increased investment in drinking water infrastructure is needed to ensure customers have better access to safe and reliable water supply for future generations. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE proposes the following to raise the grade: expand and strengthen the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program, increase principal forgiveness and private lead service line funding and opportunities, and streamline and reduce federal requirements to encourage participation. Encourage utilities to investigate water conservation and efficiency measures, including implementing uniform or increasing block rate structures and performing water audits. Adopt innovative technologies to improve maintenance, reduce water loss, enhance productivity, and reduce life cycle costs. Energy. Wisconsin's utilities provide energy to commercial, industrial, and residential ratepayers throughout the state. The mix of electrical power generation continues to evolve with new gas-fired plants, wind power, and utility-scale solar power compensating for the retirement of coal-powered plants. In general, Wisconsin's energy needs will be met through 2024. Energy shortages are unlikely, but would occur if plans for additional transmission and generation needs are not fulfilled in the future. Rate increases are common in Wisconsin, and the current average retail electricity rate is 10.58 cents per kilowatt hour, higher than the Midwest national averages. However, this additional funding is directed towards needed capital projects for generation, distribution, and transmission. Utilities and government agencies are working to develop consensus greenhouse gas emission goals and the required infrastructure to attain them. Plans for power generation must consider future demand as well as public concern for the environment. Wisconsin must continue to pursue a strong energy policy that serves economic needs and preserves the environment. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we propose the following to raise the grade in energy. Continue to reduce greenhouse gas production through conservation, renewables, nuclear and lower carbon dioxide producing fuels like natural gas. Continue to research and develop clean coal, energy storage, and carbon capture technologies. Continue to broaden the diversity of future fuel sources. Work with all stakeholders to create a workable 2050 plan for greenhouse gas reductions, including commitments to defined milestone objectives along the way. Increase diligence and preparedness to avert and recover from potential cyber attacks. Improve the reliability and redundancy of system controls and communications, along with blocking of directed cyber intrusions. Assure the reliability of imported energy supplies contractually and by transmission reliability and redundancy. Support transportation fuel efficiency by improving electric vehicle charging convenience and providing incentives for efficient vehicles. Wisconsin has been a leader in hazardous waste cleanup, brownfields, and emerging contaminant issues. The partnership between the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency ensures cleanup of contamination from hazardous waste and polychlorinated biphenyl through the One Cleanup program. Of the EPA's 1,178 national priority list sites, 36, or 3.1%, are in Wisconsin. More than 3/4 of those sites, or 28, are progressing toward being delisted. The state of Wisconsin has been proactive to protect and preserve the environment from hazardous waste. Establishing and maintaining funding along with prioritizing sites with the highest risk to the health and safety of the public are the primary concerns regarding hazardous waste sites in Wisconsin. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following recommendations to raise the grade. Provide responsible parties access to funds to support cleanup at contaminated sites based on a suite of factors such as financial need, records of operation and maintenance, and risk prioritization. Look for additional resources to decrease the backlog claims for the Dry Cleaner Environment Response Fund. Inland waterways consist of the navigation channels and associated structures that support commercial transport of materials between ports, terminals, or other locations. The major inland waterway in Wisconsin is the Mississippi River, consisting of 213 miles of navigation channels. In 2017, 25.8 million tons of cargo was transported over barges on this freight highway, consisting primarily of iron ore, steel scraps, and food products. Wisconsin's locks and dams along the inland waterway are beyond the intended end of their design life. Targeted funding allowing component replacement has kept the locks and dams functional for the time being. However, increased frequency of scheduled and unscheduled maintenance has contributed to decreased system performance, and major rehabilitation of these structures is needed to ensure long-term durability. Since 2011, the percentage of vessels experiencing delay has increased from 6% to 35%, and the average delay per lockage increased from 20 to 70 minutes. Fortunately, additional revenue sources, including public-private partnerships, are being considered to support investments to inland waterway infrastructure in Wisconsin. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we recommend the following to raise the grade. Considering allowing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contract authority for projects or some other appropriate mechanism to avoid the stop and start of construction currently happening because of the appropriations process. Ensure full utilization of the Inland Waterways Trust Fund by providing matching federal appropriations, and increase the funding of operations and maintenance of the inland waterways each year. Utilize alternative financing and delivery methods, such as public-private partnerships when appropriate. Wisconsin's port facilities range from simple harbors to multimodal distribution hubs, with transport using Great Lakes, rivers, roads, rail, and air routes. Wisconsin is home to 20 harbors, including 8 major ports, including the shared Superior, Wisconsin, Duluth, Minnesota port. The ports of Wisconsin support approximately 10,000 jobs and generated more than $1.6 billion annually in economic activity. The overall condition of Wisconsin's major ports is adequate for the demands currently placed on the state, but facilities will require adequate funding to install, replace, or maintain safe infrastructure. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following to raise the grade. Preparing for ports, harbors, and inland waterways to accommodate the newest generation of ships, particularly as more smart features are developed. Enhance Wisconsin's utilization of federal grant programs, such as the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America, better utilizing investments to leverage development, and the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Streamlining the project permitting process for port infrastructure improvements. Wisconsin encompasses more than 115,000 miles of drivable roadways. About 14,000 miles of these roadways are interstate and state highways. More than 1/3 of these roads are in fair or below condition, and deterioration is likely to continue over the next 10 years. If additional funding is not provided, 50% of the roads may experience increasing pavements rated at poor or below. More than 2/3 of major roads concentrated in urban areas were rated as fair or below in roadway condition. Deficient roads cost drivers $6 billion annually due to wear and tear on vehicles, wasted fuel due to congestion, and the overall cost of crashes on roadways. There is an estimated $13 billion shortfall over the next decade if roadway improvements are not funded. Roadway features in Wisconsin are likely a contributing factor in approximately 1/3 of fatal traffic crashes. This is tremendously significant to drivers on rural roadways throughout the state, where the fatality rate doubles the national average. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slides, we support the following steps to raise the grade. Increase the federal government investment while pursuing a more efficient and sustainable funding system at the state level. Develop a more balanced maintenance, rehabilitation, and reconstruction approach to the state's roadways to provide the optimum cost-effective lifestyle for pavement structures. Wisconsin's maintenance spending per lane mile is relatively low, while capital and administrative spending per lane mile are quite high. Municipal solid waste is generated by Wisconsin households, businesses, and other institutions. The amount of municipal solid waste generated per person in Wisconsin is consistent with the national average rate of approximately 5 pounds per person per day. The predominant method for managing municipal solid waste in the state is landfilling. Landfills generally have sufficient capacity and are in good condition, a result of robust state regulatory oversight. Combined recycling and composting rates in the state are comparable to national averages at approximately 1/3 of waste generated. Recycling programs rely on revenue from the sale of recyclables, prices of which are driven by volatile international markets that are currently at historically low values. Recycling rates have stagnated in recent years, and municipal recycling programs could benefit from increased state funding. A balance between economic, social, and environmental impacts is needed for all solid waste management efforts to succeed in the future. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following to raise the grade. The complex and diverse nature of waste, waste generators, and waste management options, coupled with a mixture of public and private involvement, presents significant challenges to gathering reliable data. Wisconsin should increase efforts to collect, analyze, and openly distribute key municipal solid waste statistics, such as waste generated per person, recycling as a percentage of waste generated, and waste disposition, that is, percentage that is landfilled, recycled, composted, or combusted, following the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency facts and figures approach. This data is needed to educate the public, track progress, and shape future decisions. Waste reduction efforts by all generators, residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial, will result in less stress on the overall structure and less impact on the environment. Reduction is at the top of waste management hierarchy. If waste is not generated, it does not require management. Combined recycling and composting rates in the state have stagnated for several years at an estimated rate of approximately 1/3 of total waste generated, which is consistent with national averages. Continued efforts to increase the collected efficiency of recyclable materials, especially those with higher market values, such as aluminum containers and numbers 1 and 2 plastics, and to avoid landfilling such materials, will provide many benefits. The estimated value of disposed, that is recyclables, exceeds $100 million annually. It is estimated that less than 1/2 of many easily recyclable items, such as aluminum cans, plastic bottles, and steel cans, are actually recycled. The establishment of state and/or local recycling goals is encouraged. Solid waste management infrastructure is largely market-driven. As such, decisions are most often made on an economic basis. Increasingly, the desire for sustainable solutions requires an evaluation of economic, environmental, and social impact, often termed the triple bottom line. A balance among these three factors is needed to proceed with sustainable solid waste management in the future. Stormwater runoff and the subsequent effect of its volume, intensity, and associated pollutant loading continues to challenge Wisconsinites and our way of life. Wisconsin is home to 15,000 inland lakes and impoundments, 53,000 streams, about 200 miles of boundaries on the Mississippi River, nearly 2,700 miles of trout streams, and more than 1,000 miles of Great Lakes coastline, including 192 beach miles. The quality of these natural resources depends in large part on the state's stormwater infrastructure. Presently, 120 Wisconsin municipalities have implemented stormwater utilities to fund their local stormwater programs. Annual utilities generally collect between $10 and $150 per year on average for single-family homes, with the average payment approximately $60 per year. Bolstering funding levels of these municipal stormwater utilities is also key to improving our grade. Adequate funding through utilities, grants, and other programs, and effective use of those funds is critical toward success of all systems. Additionally, the state should closely rate and monitor the condition of natural waterways and utilize data and research to budget effectively and efficiently. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we recommend the following to raise the stormwater grade. Bolster the funding level of municipal stormwater utilities to allow for more sustainable management of our regional best management practices across Wisconsin. Efficient transit service is a major component of a multimodal transportation system and a key to public safety, commerce, and easing congestion. In Wisconsin, transit takes on many forms, ranging from urban fixed route bus transit systems to rural taxi service. For many, that means alternative means of transportation to work, school, and recreation, filling a critical transportation need for transit-dependent people. Unfortunately, funding challenges from federal, state, and local entities present public transit systems in Wisconsin with tremendous financial hurdles to overcome. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following to raise the grade. Incorporate transit initiatives into land use and transportation planning, including larger service areas, maximize accessibility, and linkages between jobs and supporting workforces. Include high-speed bus and rail corridors and other transit travel time enhancements in transportation to help make transit the travel mode of choice and to reduce congestion and improve safety in primary travel corridors. Wastewater. Wisconsin's municipal utilities are facing challenges due to aging infrastructure, growth, and new wastewater discharge regulations. The estimated future needs for municipal wastewater infrastructure maintenance and upgrades for Wisconsin total $6.3 billion. Utilities are raising rates to cover necessary costs and to combat dwindling grant funding. In Wisconsin, the average annual rate increase of nearly 5% is higher than the national average. However, the true cost of service is often still not reflective of raised rates. The highest rate increases occur in small rural communities of 1,000 to 2,000 residents. Meanwhile, approximately 25% of Wisconsin residents do not have access to sanitary sewers, mainly relying on on-site septic or other treatment systems. Municipalities and wastewater utilities will face significant capital costs to meet new phosphorus water quality standards for lakes, reservoirs, rivers, and streams. Collection and treatment systems are seeing the impacts of increased inflow and infiltration from more intense and frequent storm events due to climate change. Anticipated new regulatory requirements for previously undiscovered compounds like PFAS will also add to the financial burden on wastewater treatment facilities and ratepayers. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we recommend the following to raise the grade. Permit holders may incur significant capital and operation expenses to achieve the water quality-based effluent criteria for phosphorus and microconstituents, which are at the practical limits of current technology. Planning is necessary for the physical facilities and financial needs for achieving these limits. The potential impacts of climate change, such as infiltration and inflow, may impact collection systems such that future capacity will be more difficult to predict and costly to address. Support efforts for public outreach on the value of water and wastewater services and provide incentives for source reduction. Utility rates should cover the full cost of service, including operation, maintenance, and capital needs. As you can see, Wisconsin's infrastructure still needs attention. You are now equipped to speak on each of the core areas of Wisconsin's infrastructure. For access to the complete Wisconsin 2020 Infrastructure Report Card, please visit infrastructurereportcard.org/state-item/Wisconsin as shown on this slide. I would also like to emphasize it's important to view infrastructure holistically in addition to each infrastructure category. As an example, greater use of ports to move freight or transit to move people results in decreased traffic for bridge and roads, increasing their efficiency and useful life. Again, thank you for your time and attention. Please feel free to ask questions on this at the conclusion of the economics presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Our next presenter is Dr. William Holohan from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Dr. Holohan holds a master's and PhD in economics from Brown University. He's received numerous awards for his work in the classroom and has published many papers in economic journals. Dr. Holohan will discuss the effects of investing in infrastructure projects on the economy. We welcome Dr. Holohan to today's conference.
Economy. It's going to be a little bit different than the engineering presentations because what I want to focus on is the role of spending and, of course, borrowing to pay for trillions of dollars worth of new public fixed assets that we can use going forward. The intent of this video is to present these economic concepts, show how the spending relates to recessions and expansions, borrowing, as well as debt and deficits, and to help build the case for infrastructure spending in the face of opposition on the that is based upon the already high national debt. There's a lot of misunderstanding about debt and deficits, and we don't want the confusion to hold up the spending that we want on these fixed assets. So fasten your seatbelts because here is the core principle of macroeconomics. Courage, everyone. First of all, the common sense version is everyone's spending is someone else's income. That's pretty sensible when you think about it, but it needs to be pointed out so that we can put infrastructure spending and borrowing and so on into perspective. The big picture here is that all the goods, services, and assets, everything is one of these three: goods or services or assets, and all of those goods bought in the private market consists of three components. Consumption, that's about 70% of the total. Business investment, that's 9 or 10%. And net exports, that's the difference between what the nation exports minus what it imports. So consumption is represented by the letter C. Business investment is represented by the letter I, and net exports is X minus M. X for exports, E for, or M for imports. Add to all of that, all the goods and services and assets bought by the government, which we represent by the letter G. That whole summation must equal in value the incomes of all the people who made all those goods, services, and assets. All that stuff. Another way to put it is national income equals national purchases in dollar value on both sides of the equation, okay? And the algebra version is the famous national income account equation. Gross domestic product equals C plus I plus G plus net exports, X minus M. This is an accounting equation. It's not right or left wing. It's not capitalist or socialist or communist or vegetarian or anything other than the way any country has to keep track of the flow of income and purchases. Okay, now to break this down a little bit better, all spending becomes someone's income. Let's follow the money. We'll follow the money. When money is spent on infrastructure assets, which by the way is part of G, typically, income is earned by those who build, install, modernize, and repair those assets. So all the engineers, all the scientists, all the people, all the teamsters, and all those people who get involved in installing and repairing and maintaining infrastructure assets, they earn money doing so. They spend a large portion of that added income, the income added to their wallets, they spend a portion of that on their preferred goods and services. Those who provide those goods and services to these people, so when these people buy groceries and gasoline and pay the rent and so forth, these people earn additional income, which they then spend on their consumer preferences. So there's a round of spending here, there's a round of spending here, and these rounds of spending continue. These rounds add to total demand for goods and services, adding to jobs. If you're in a recession, this kind of spending will shorten the recession and make the recession less severe. So what we have then is a bit of a discursive version of that equation that we saw earlier. Meanwhile, when the infrastructure is in good working order, the economy operates with more well-functioning, long-lived, durable, however you want to say it, long-lived productive assets. If you go to the national income accounts, and who doesn't, these are called government fixed non-residential assets. When the infrastructure is in good shape, we have greater productivity and greater sustainability. In other words, we're not going to be putting in 1880 vintage infrastructure anymore. We're going to be putting in state-of-the-art infrastructure to replace obsolete and worn out infrastructure, and that's going to be more climate conserving. So, or sustainable is a word a lot of people use. In a recession, especially the one that has been induced by the pandemic, government spending is, consumer spending is way down, as we'll see here in a minute. That fall in C has induced a fall in business investment. So C and I tend to fall together. And then we have the government. Fiscal policy is an increase in G, purposely timed to offset the recession, purposely timed, in other words, to offset the fall in C plus I. And if it's focused on infrastructure, we get physical fixed assets that produce benefits long after the recession has gone away. So in other words, increasing in the spending reduces the severity of the recession, reduces the duration of the recession, and invests in the post-recession recovery. So recessions are an excellent time to be investing in infrastructure. Monetary policy is the other major function of the government, and that is to cut interest rates to induce more spending. But as we're going to see here in a minute, those interest rates are already so low that there's very little extra power left in monetary policy. Reminder, infrastructure spending is part of G, It enhances productivity, okay? And it has that multiplier effect as consumers and businesses spend and re-spend the money. So that helps to offset the pandemic. Let's look at how bad the situation has become. Here we are in February of 2021. We had 153 million jobs in February of 2020, 1 year ago, when the trouble began. C plus I fell tremendously, and then jobs fell very suddenly and historically never seen anything like it. A 21 million job loss in just 2 months, mostly in the month of March. So here we were, relative to February, we were down 21 million jobs. Then each month, each of these little step functions here is a month in which the jobs report, comes out first Friday of every month, 8:30 Eastern time, and we get the report. Well, we started to rebuild our job base at fairly rapid rates at first, but notice something. Each one of these stair steps is getting smaller. See, here we have a really big one, then a somewhat smaller one, smaller, 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 really small. And then in November, we actually lost jobs. Then in December, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a tiny, tiny increase here. And here's where we are now. We're down 9.9 million jobs relative to this dotted line, which is February of 2020. So the net result after a year has gone by, we're still down almost 10 million jobs. So horrible situation. Long-term unemployment, this is really important. Long-term means if you're unemployed, you've been, and long-term unemployed, 27 weeks or longer, 27 weeks or longer, a little over half a year. That's when skills evaporate. That's when lost opportunity to learn on the job and lost skills that were acquired in the past, tend to depreciate. And so of the unemployed, 39.3 have been unemployed for 27 weeks or longer. Here's the unemployment rate. There's several different unemployment rates. This is what's called the headline unemployment rate. It's the one they report on the evening news or the all day long news. If you're familiar with government statistics, this is U3. Anyway, and it includes all the people that are unemployed but still looking for a job to replace the one that they had lost or the one that they aspire to. You can see it's, of course, spiked when the pandemic hit, and it's been coming down, but it's still settling at around 6.3. And as you saw a couple slides ago, things are kind of leveling off at a very depressing rate. Here, now, some people have left the labor force altogether, which reminds us that the labor force only includes those people that either have a job or are actively looking for a job. What if you have been so discouraged that you stop looking? The way you measure that is the percentage of people who are in the labor force as a fraction of the total population. And that is down to 61.4. It had been up as high as 63.5. So it's down almost 2 full percentage points. And that is a huge hunk of the population. It all comes back to GDP equals C plus I plus G, which I've exaggerated here to remind ourselves this is going to be a government function, plus X minus M. The government function is to help us get these assets built, maintained, repaired, and so on. Public infrastructure has been neglected. Now, the American Society of Civil Engineers 2017 report card has yielded this data. The gray bar is estimated funding for this decade, 2016 to 2025. And we need $2 trillion. We have about half of that planned. And so the gap is this orange portion of the larger bar graph. Electricity doing a little bit better. Here's the estimated funding. Here is the gap. This is the gap. Now, I would urge you to realize if we get serious about climate, this bar graph is going to be much bigger. We're going to have to electrify much of what we do. Cars, heating, trucks, delivery, things like that. Trains, moving to electric trains and away from diesel. And that is going to require a major increase in the electric grid. Also, the electric grid has to be completed. It doesn't cover the whole United States. And one of the most important gaps is between the Mississippi River going east and out to what is called the Wind Alley that starts in North Dakota and goes down to western Texas. That is an area where the wind never stops. And one of the problems with renewable energy, of course, is what happens when there's cloud cover. What happens if the wind doesn't blow? Well, you don't need to worry about that from North Dakota down to West Texas. And so that is where we're going to put an awful lot of wind generated electricity, but then we have to transport that electricity across to Chicago, St. Louis, Milwaukee, places like that will have to introduce that electricity into the grid. Also, if we get serious about climate, we're going to be decommissioning the coal-fired power plants and moving more toward renewables backed up by lithium ion batteries. So this is going to be a much bigger deal in the years to come. Schools. School buildings are dilapidated in a lot of places, particularly urban and rural areas. If we want those kids to close the education gap, we're going to have to spend a lot of money and see that the planning is way behind the need. Waterways, ports, airports, you can see the continuation. I was surprised to see airports is so small. Our domestic airports are way behind other countries who are major trading partners. Also, if we get serious about climate, we're going to have more rail. So expect this bar graph to grow. All right, let's move on. The current report card, the 2021 report card on Wisconsin, is dismal. You'd never let your kid get away with grades like this. C+ for bridges, C+ for dams, C- for drinking water, and essential for life itself. Ports, how do we compete globally if our ports cannot handle the freight? Roads, we know we're killing our cars on these neglected roads and potholes and so forth. And of course, public transit is a joke. All right, so what do we have here? We are borrowing money at very low interest rates. Very low interest rates. Maybe we can adjust this downward a little bit. Okay, so we can see it. Money borrowed at very low interest rates these days. We're going to borrow money for the infrastructure and for the COVID response and for helping people feed their families because the demand for in-person services and so-called essential workers way down. So we're going to be borrowing a lot of that money, and fortunately interest rates are really low. This is a repeat. All spending is someone else's income and so on, but it doesn't end there. Movement of goods and people, think of it as a productivity increase. Whenever productivity goes up, costs go down. When costs go down, the US can compete more effectively in the world economy. When costs go down, US jobs are enhanced because we can compete in terms of jobs with other countries. Travel time, travel safety are good examples of that. Internet capacity. Really very important here in Wisconsin. farmers need better connectivity, high speed, because farming these days requires you to be in instantaneous contact with the financial markets, as well as learning on webinars and so on of modern farm practices, irrigation practices, and so on. Same thing with dairy, misspelled word there, let's fix that. And of course, schools, urban and rural schools tend to be underinvested in broadband. Can't keep up with the world if in a school where that is the case. Public health, water quality, air quality, food safety. These are all resultants of that terrible report card. These are in jeopardy. Already talked about the electric grid. Okay, productivity is enhanced, recession, less severe productivity. But what about financing? The debt, where possible, users of these assets should pay for their use. Wherever you have a road or a bridge or something like that, where the users can be identified and their use measured, you have the preconditions for user charges. And a user charge on bridges, roads, water, electricity, cable, internet use, and so on, forces people to think, is the benefit that I'm getting from using this asset enough to justify the cost which I have to pay? I don't get to get the benefit and have the general taxpayer pay for my usage. So that helps keep the budgets under control. Why doesn't the private sector handle infrastructure investment? The answer is these are public goods. These are goods that we have to share. These are so enormous that you can't have competition. You don't have competition in the sewer system, for example. So even though free markets require streets and roads and sewer and water and things like that, it won't produce them because if they did, they'd charge monopoly prices, then they'd have to be regulated. And the public sector does a pretty good job of regulating these basic public utilities. Anyway, for political reasons especially, they've moved into the public sector. So we have public roads, we have public water, we have public flood control, disaster relief, things like that. It's pretty hard to get a private return on investment in these areas. State dollars and borrowing pay for most infrastructure projects. State dollars, and this is, people think it all comes from the federal government. More of it probably should, because the federal government can borrow at lower interest rates. States can only borrow or issue bonds if there are some kind of designated funding to repay the bonds. And then you have dedicated fees and things like that, tolls and whatnot, and general funds, income taxes and so on, unrelated to use. State and local governments own the vast majority of public capital. Vast majority. You can see in dark orange, $10.6 trillion in 2017. And the federal government has a much smaller share of these fixed assets. So we have to worry about the debt. National debt's already high. It's going to get higher. Here's how you measure the burden of the debt. You divide the debt by GDP. It's currently 106%. The all-time high was 112% right after World War II. This 106 is going to go up. Fight the pandemic. We're not taxing enough to come anywhere close to balancing the budget. So of course it's going to go up. If we grow the denominator of GDP, that means that we grow our way out of the debt, which is exactly what we did after World War II. We brought that 112 down to about 33% before the debt started to go up under President Reagan. If we build productivity enhancing public assets, i.e. infrastructure, then future taxpayers will inherit both financial debt and those assets. So you can think of it as double entry bookkeeping, where on one side, here's the letter L, you have liabilities. On the other side, you have assets and liabilities. Think about both sides when you want to borrow to invest in infrastructure. You get greater productivity and competitiveness. This supports after-tax income growth, which makes it more feasible to bring down the national debt as a fraction of GDP. So the engineers have another report called the cost of doing nothing, as opposed to spending a trillion or two. Actually, you will be giving the future a better deal if you hand them well-functioning public fixed assets to go with the debt. They will actually be richer, not poorer, if you do that. One final thing, here's the national federal debt as a percentage of gross domestic product. And you can see it's rising and rising and rising. Here's where it jumped into the Trump administration due to the pandemic, basically. And so here we are, very high. You'd expect that would drive up interest rates and cause a great deal of consternation in the markets. Just the opposite happened. Rates are down. These are 10-year Treasury constant maturity rate bonds. And you can see that those rates are down despite the skyrocketing debt. Can't go on forever, but there is no one-to-one relationship between debt and interest rates. So we have expected reaction to additional federal borrowing. One is we're spending money we don't have. Well, of course, when you borrow money, you are spending money you don't have. That's why you borrow it. And we're borrowing from our grandchildren. Well, we're actually borrowing from each other. We're borrowing from savers who want some kind of an investment. They've basically decided worldwide that US Treasury securities are about the safest thing they can invest in. So we're really not borrowing from our grandchildren. They will have to pay back, but they get assets to work with to help them pay it back. We're actually making them richer, not poorer. So this is bogus. We will suffer inflation. It's nowhere in sight if If it does rear its ugly head, the Federal Reserve tries to shoot for about 2% inflation. They've been under that for years. And we will see, and they can tighten when and if that time comes. But as Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, used to be the head of the Federal Reserve, chairperson of the Federal Reserve, she said the other day that there's much greater danger in undershooting this spending than overshooting. And if inflation does materialize, we can deal with it at that time. We will become Venezuela. That's another thing you'll hear. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a highly socialist country. It's not a competitive market like we have. And it's reliant heavily on oil, which is, of course, going down in value as we switch to renewables. Drive up interest rates, thus crowding out business investment and growth. Well, as we saw in that earlier graph, that isn't happening either. So let's build that infrastructure, but get ready. There are very good reasons for continuing. These are not coherent objections, but be ready to answer those. Thank you for your time. There will be a question period to follow this. I'll turn it back now to the moderator, who will get the question and answer underway. Hello.
Thank you, Dr. Holohan. Just as a reminder, we are taking questions now. We're going to take those questions up shortly. We have a couple in the queue. If you'd like to ask a question, we're using the Zoom Q&A box. The Q&A box can be found by scrolling your mouse over the top or bottom of your Zoom screen, or tapping on your tablet device and look for the Q&A icon. But before we get to the question and answer, we'd like to take two quick polls. The first poll I'll put up here is asking you to identify the top 3 infrastructure segments of most concern to you. Multiple choice question. You can pick 3 infrastructure segments. You may have to scroll your screen in order to see all the choices, but please select 3. And then when you've satisfied with your 3 answers, there should be a blue submit button on the bottom of the screen. Thank you. So we'll give you a couple seconds here to pick your top 3 infrastructure segments that are of most concern to you. About half the people here have voted. Maybe another 10 seconds here. About 2/3 of the people voted. Okay, very good. We got about 80% participation here. Let me share the results. Transportation leads the area of most concern, followed closely behind by water resources area, which would include dams, levees, and drinking water. And then in 3rd place is energy, and then schools. We might come back to this poll here as we get into the question and answer period. The second poll is talking about broadband, which has been in the news lately. we'd like to ask you, and we certainly realize that everyone here is connected by broadband to today's webinar. Please rate your broadband access in your area. As you rate it, they would consider whether A, you have it, B, is the speed adequate, and C, is it reliable or does it have lots of downtime? This is an interesting poll as we compare the 4 different webinars that we're conducting as we move across the state, given that Northwest Wisconsin is more of a rural character than urban. Okay, we've got about 82% participation here. I'm going to close this poll in about 5 seconds. If you're undecided on voting, here's your last chance. Okay. And the majority at 34% is saying fair. And we have about 44% that's good and very good. So we're not to that halfway point of being good yet. So thanks for your participation in the polls. And we'll get back to the panel now. I'd like to invite all of our panelists to turn their cameras on and turn their microphones on. And we'll begin the panel discussion portion of the presentation today. I'd like to welcome 2 people who haven't been introduced yet. First, Jake Brunailer. Jake was a member of the report card committee for ASCE, and also like to welcome Carol Diggleman from the League of Women Voters. So we are here to answer your questions from what you heard from Carl and Dr. Holohan's presentations. And I am going to start at the top of the list here. And I'm going to split these up a little bit differently than what you're seeing, just a fair warning to the panelists. Lori is asking a question and has a comment as an introductory remark. She's saying, this is quite an overwhelming laundry list of needed infrastructure improvement. Thanks to ASCE for their work. But one question, how will President Biden's proposed legislation help us with these needs? I guess I toss this one first to Carl and then Dr. Holohan to interject some comments. Carl?
Okay, thank you, Marty. Well, first of all, any funding is greatly appreciated, especially when it comes to infrastructure. It's an ambitious package that has been put together, covering many of the different items of infrastructure we talked about today, and also on a national basis. I would also mention that part of the plan is he's dedicating money to broadband, and if depends upon the way, my last understanding is that the way this is going to happen is it probably won't come about until an actual bill, last I heard was somewhere around July, that would be done, and everything would be done according to that. One of the items that that's in there is how much is going to come into Wisconsin. I guess at this point, we don't know that yet. We just have to kind of wait and see and hope that we aren't, in the vernacular of the old transportation department things, that we aren't a donor state, that we actually receive funding rather than putting in more money than we're receiving.
Thanks, Carl. Dr. Holohan, do you have a comment?
Well, the state has to be willing to accept the money. We have a bad track record here. We've turned down Medicaid expansion money. We've turned down railroad money that adds up into several billions of dollars over the last decade. So we have to turn that ideological position around. And the main advantage for a small state like Wisconsin, small in the sense that we're a small piece of a gigantic federal system, is that when the federal system wants to expand by a couple of $1 trillion, if we take our share, we're in for a very good slug of money toward the various aspects that Carl went through an hour ago in that report card, list by list. And but we have to be willing to work within a federal system, and that is not our habit. The other thing is that there are many federal objectives. I would mention too, the electrification of our energy sector is a national problem of which we will have to play a part. The other would be the rail system. Some of the national rail plans will go through Wisconsin. They will not be contained within Wisconsin. That means that we have to accept the money and the projects that will go through Wisconsin at great benefit to Wisconsin, but also to the national economy as we have routes going, say, from Chicago, Milwaukee, La Crosse, Minnesota, as one example. And a lot of that money is slated for Wisconsin. So, and as on the electrification, back to that for just a second. If we're going to use the electricity that is available through the renewables, particularly wind and solar in the wind alley that I talked about during my video, we have to stretch the transmission lines across the state of Wisconsin in order to make it available to the upper Midwest. And so that will be advantageous not only to Wisconsin and job creation within the state, but also to the nation as a whole. Okay, back to you.
Thank you. Carol or Louise, any comments from the league perspective?
Yes.
Did you say my name, Carol? I thought you began to speak.
No, I defer to you.
Okay, thank you. I didn't hear it clearly. In terms of any infrastructure improvements that we have, you might say, in the offing, given Mr. Biden's Build Back Better program, certainly, they will certainly help our communities that are suffering. We have a lot of economic suffering going on in the northern part of the state. Whatever we can do to improve the availability of federal funds will certainly benefit our state, whether it's wastewater treatment systems up in Ashland or Milwaukee or Dane County. All of that money will benefit our state and people who work here.
Thanks. And I just chip in as well that if you remember the stimulus bill, was 2008 or 9 or 10, somewhere in that time period in the Obama administration, there was a word that was bantered about for those projects, and that word was shovel ready.
Mhm.
And from an engineering perspective, I just have to chime in that there aren't a lot of projects that are, quote, shovel ready. Because if we were to design projects and put them on the shelf, products change, conditions change, specifications change, and there just isn't that much advantage to working ahead. So when you're looking at, say, a highway project from the first time it gets enumerated or put on a program, it could take 4 to 10 years before we cut the ribbon on that project. So even though this is a huge infrastructure bill that we're talking about, it's not a light switch that we're just going to turn on and fix infrastructure problems right away. Dr. Holland, you had your hand up?
Um, Yeah, I think just to add to our concern about the northern part of the state, the broadband situation is really very critical because during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, there has developed what's called a COVID slide. This means the children are not keeping up to grade level. In fact, they're sliding backward because of the in-home online schooling is not as effective as in-person on-site schooling, which we're going to go back to once we get the COVID suppressed with the vaccine program. So we're going to have a campaign to try to bring them back up toward proficiency levels that we were enjoying before. And the research is showing that online tutoring and online webinars and seminars and so on for children, designed for children, are actually remarkably effective. But you got to have the broadband in place for the kids to take advantage of it. So this is how one program helps another. The other thing I'd point out is that we cannot rely on the private sector or the so-called free market to do this. These are public goods. The free market requires certain things to be done in the public sector, and streets and roads and broadband, climate protection, and design of the electric grid and so forth are examples of that. All of that is in the Biden $2 trillion program.
Very good. Carol, you had your hand up.
I recalled that I was a sophomore in high school when Russia launched the Sputnik. And overnight, that got the attention of everyone in this country. And we had strong responses in terms of science and technology, mathematics, and we shifted to, I guess, joining the race for matching that technology. The scope of Biden's program is very broad, and it will depend upon how well the political groups in this country can work together to make this happen. There's a lot of unknowns here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Jake, I'm going to move on to the next question and warn you that this one's coming your way, so be prepared. I'm going to combine two questions from Lori and Joseph.
Sounds good.
The question basically is asking about prioritization of projects and improvements to infrastructure segments, and I'll read the question so that everybody's on the same page here. Is it more beneficial to prioritize the D's and the B's, speaking of the report card, recognizing that we cannot afford to do everything at once? Or is there a metric which would inform prioritization, like, for example, risk to human life? And combined with that question is really, if financial resources are not sufficient to accomplish all recommendations, how should the allocation of resources be prioritized?
So both Lori and Joseph asked really good questions. And a couple of things to keep in mind about the report card. And if you're hoping to glean some sort of prioritization methodology within that document, if you find one, we didn't mean to put it there. So there's, in that regard, I will caution you to try and kind of change the way you think about infrastructure as part of this whole report card kind of analysis in these presentations, that infrastructure functions so holistically that prioritizing one over another can be potentially problematic. And it just really, there's no way that those infrastructure sectors don't affect other infrastructure sectors. For example, if you think about the stormwater infrastructure that if you look at central Wisconsin, where they're currently trying to assess the effects of climate change, and try and adjust and redesign their stormwater infrastructure accordingly, as that infrastructure is we'll say undersized or underperforming, it will inevitably have adverse effects on other infrastructure sectors, where your roadways start to deteriorate, which then starts to deteriorate ports and things like that, where you've got water getting to places that it's not supposed to be. Your energy grid is not reliable. That's going to impact transportation systems, transit systems, water systems. All of those function as a holistic view. And so it's really difficult to prioritize that. And that's why professionals take years of experience to be able to determine the most beneficial use of those funds available. And so we know that the pot is not bottomless when it comes to those dollars. And so we have to be very, very cautious about how we spend that. But at the same time, it's important that we spend it with a holistic view, that just raising one grade is not going to solve our problems and improve our quality of life. We're going to have to be strategic and comprehensive in the way that we invest those dollars. And so I will add, though, if you look, the current administration, if anyone tuned in to some of the Badger Bounce Back live sessions tuned in last night, our current administration has made it very clear that broadband and transportation and transit and are certainly key areas for their future spending and future budgets, as well as flood prevention. So kind of taking some real hard looks at the way that we're prepared for climate change, whether regardless of what you believe is causing it. As engineers, we really are tasked with figuring out how to manage it and how to safely protect our cities and surrounding areas from the effects of climate change. So and our current administration, even Biden's whole package aside, I think just within our current budgets here at a state level, we've made it clear that infrastructure is important, and specifically within those sectors, which really, if you look, aligns almost, it's almost eerie how closely it aligns with some of the poor grades in our infrastructure report cards. So we'll say we may have got that right when we went through that assessment in the report card. So the closest to a brushing your shoulder off you'll ever get from me. But yeah, that's a great question. So thank you.
Go ahead, Carl.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. At the beginning of this, when I was discussing ASCE, I said that our code of ethics lists that we as engineers, first and foremost, protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Now, health and safety, if you take that is our prioritization. It is more important to protect the health of someone than to add capacity to a system if you're given those choices. But it's not always black and white, it's very gray. And it's the policymakers that are going to decide what projects are going to be done and when they are going to be done.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I would just add to that as well that when you're asking who's going to set those priorities, it's the elected officials in most cases that are going to approve these budgets and set those things. So now more than ever, probably it's imperative that you have a relationship with your elected officials at all levels, state, federal, and local, and let them know that you have an opinion on something and something is of concern to you, because they're the ones that ultimately will allocate the resources to that end. The other thing I would add is that although straight A's might be a nice aspirational goal to the report card, it might not be technically or even economically a good place to be. ASCE generally recommends that we'd like to strive for something in the B to a high B range, because as you go from, say, a B plus to an A minus, the costs can be very high, but the benefits are rather small. So there's a point of diminishing returns there. Okay, let's move on to the next question here that I'm going to take up. This one comes from Pat, and I've got some things to say, but I'll let our panel go first. Question is, adequate funding for roads is an unresolved issue. Does anyone have the answer for this? Town, county, state, and federal entities?
I think from the standpoint of the local municipalities, I just want to comment on that. A lot of them are very strapped right now with what they do. And with the levy limits that have been imposed within the state for the local units of government, they're not allowed to raise their levy rates very much and to cover this type of work. And I know that there, as an example, with the road funding formula, there are several different components to that. And I think, Marty, you will probably address that, so I'm not going to do that. But it's a matter of putting it all together so you have a package that covers not only the expansion, the capital improvements of the roads, but also the operation and maintenance of them.
Very good. Anybody else want to take a stab at this one before I chip in my 2 cents?
Louise here, Marty.
Sure.
One of the things, I was thinking exactly levy limits when Carl answered the question. If you are concerned about the quality of the infrastructure, especially the roads or whatever, where I live, we did a survey of electrical energy use back in 2010, 2011, and we found that most of the municipalities in Milwaukee County would like to have moved to more energy conservative basically lights, street lights, or heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, but they were strapped because of levy limits. So I think what one can do is talk to their assembly representative and state senator and say, we need to get rid of those levy limits. We at the local level can govern ourselves wisely. We certainly have a lot of budget hawks locally where I live in Milwaukee County, and they will do the work of looking at the budgets. But without lifting of these levy limits, we're strapped, and we're strapped for increasing costs down the road because we cannot do what we need to do now. So get to your local assembly representative and state senator and make sure they hear your voice.
Dr. Holohan.
Yeah, I think one of the other questions that relates to this, and that is one of the questioners wanted to know when you show up at a town hall or some kind of public place, what do you ask the people running for office or the people that are holding office? And my suggestion is, what do they know about economics? I mean, part of the other, this question about funding is relates to user charges. I mean, the idea that we haven't raised the gasoline tax since 1992 is one of the reasons why we're driving around on such god-awful roads. If we're not willing to have the users of these public assets pay for them, or at least help pay for them, then it shouldn't be surprising that we don't have funding for them, because the people who are not using these assets will have to pay, and they will of course object to paying for something that they don't use. So you have an automatic conflict among people who want to see these things in good shape and other people who don't want to pay for them because they're not using them. And the other thing to point out is that the federal government is now, through this Biden plan, planning to greatly step up the spending coming from Washington. Well, guess what Mitch McConnell said today? He said he plans to fight the Biden infrastructure plan, quote, every step of the way. So unless voters and the League of Women Voters and the engineers and so on get conversant about all of these economic aspects of the problem, then the Mitch McConnell ideological constraints represented in Wisconsin by people like Robin Voss, unless these people are forced to demonstrate their economic ignorance, we're not going to be able to make headway on these issues.
Thank you, Dr. Halheim. It kind of goes a little bit to Rick's question, asking about what information can help people support infrastructure spending. Well, certainly we would advocate for our report, which Carl put the link on, but if you just Google Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card, you'll certainly find it. The National Report Card, which is an aggregation of all 50 states, was just released in March, and that's available online as well. I have gone to both Madison and Washington, D.C. and spoken with people about report card issues. And the takeaway I have there, this is not in a ASCE position, the takeaway I have here is not many people do that. And there's a small number of people that it takes to sway policymakers' decision. So we really need to step up our legislative advocacy efforts. But I want to go back to the core question just for a second. I'm mostly retired now, but I did most of my work in the transportation field, designing transportation infrastructure, primarily roads and bridges. And I also served in 2013 on the Transportation Funding and Policy Commission. And in that report, which is still available online, there must have been 20 or 25 different ideas we had for transportation revenue. And well, why did we have so many different ideas? Well, as many of you know, and if you don't, I'm going to remind you that the primary focus of transportation funding is really the fuel tax and the registration fee. And the fuel tax is based on consumption. And as our fleet becomes more efficient and starts to convert to alternative fuels, that fuel tax revenue is going to start to erode. So, and I am straying from ASCE position statements here a bit too, from just my personal experience, but Jake talked about the stormwater and the user fee kind of aspect of that. I think that needs to be considered for transportation. And we're basically talking about a vehicle miles traveled tax. Certainly, I understand the privacy aspects of something like that, but holy cow, we leave digital footprints across everywhere we go. So I'm not sure that that's really a valid concern anymore. But it can be designed to be quite fair and quite adequate and quite sustainable. You can start with something as simple as reporting your odometer mileage every time you get your new sticker and just do a flat rate. Or you could get as complex as having it geo-centered based on where you are, the type of road, the weight of your vehicle, and time of day, among other factors. Because the capacity question, granted, trucks are the primary vehicles that wear out roads and bridges. But you get to urbanized areas and vehicles, passenger vehicles, create a stress on the system because they occupy space. So space becomes a more critical valuable in an urban area as opposed to weight and traffic volumes in the more rural areas. So I'll get off my soapbox there, but I'm a little bit passionate on that. Carl, you'd like to add or correct me?
No, I don't want to correct you. I just want to tell everyone, Bill earlier referred to have the users of the system pay for it. And that is exactly ASCE's position. They have come out several times with several policy statements saying, wherever possible, have the user of the system pay for it. You pay for your water, there's a lot of things. You pay for stormwater now. We have several stormwater utilities in the state of Wisconsin. You pay for that. So if you're going to use the system, you should be expected to pay for it.
Yeah, I think we're up to 140 municipalities that have a stormwater utility of varying shape and size. I think here in my backyard here in Appleton, I think I pay the highest one. So we can hang our hat on that. But But I think there's some growing champions for trip generation estimation for user fees, where a given property owner pays a certain amount based on the estimated number of vehicles in and out of their property every day. And so there's municipalities that have already passed ordinances to fund their local program funding, their roads programs through some of those alternative means. And we'll see what the end result is, but I think so far the results coming back are positive. So it's interesting to see innovation in this space towards funding, towards operations and maintenance, because the cost of ownership on these assets is real, and we're not necessarily putting the money into it that needs to be.
Yeah, and I agree that the user fee strategy is really a backbone for some of these policies. And I'm encouraged by the infrastructure discussions that are occurring at the state and federal level. But there's far less discussion going on about where that money is going to come from. And Dr. Holohan, told us the advantages of borrowing in the current low interest environment, but it's not the end game and solution for everything. And I don't mean to pour cold water by this statement, but Wisconsin has done studies. We've done a tolling study. Other states have done all kinds of vehicle mileage tax studies. Minnesota and Oregon, probably the leading states. But the last time we adjusted the federal fuel tax was 1993. And the last time we adjusted the state fuel tax by legislative action was 1997. And in that same period, construction costs have more than doubled. So if you just kind of graph that in your head, if you will, it's not a sustainable future. So there are lots of ideas out there, and it's going to take some political will to move the bar and look at exploring some of these different ways to collect revenue to support these infrastructure systems. And not just the investment in building them, maintenance and preservation is a big component. That was one of the first things that was cut in hard times, is they backed off on frequency of snow plowing, frequency of crack filling, frequency of joint repair. And that's how we got into this desperate situation where we see a D+ grade now. Anybody else want to pile on that one? Probably enough. Let's move to a different sector, shall we? We have a question here about energy and electricity from Dorothy. And I'm not the energy expert here, so I'll take a volunteer to take this one. What is the status of development of electricity transmission in a smart grid to serve every user of electricity in Wisconsin?
Well, I'll refer to the report that we did. I don't know exactly what Dorothy means by the smart grid, but let me just, I'll just quote from the energy section. It says that since 2017, the PSC of Wisconsin has focused distribution reliability on 5 grid modernization priorities. They are distributed energy sources, customers' expectations, advanced metering, safety and reliability, and increased electrification. Energy got a B grade in the state of Wisconsin. Our energy system is pretty strong. Over the course of time, we have a plan to basically be shutting down a lot of the coal-powered plants and going with alternative forms of energy, part of the whole greenhouse gas emissions, green funding type of situation. So that is currently occurring, and I hope I answered Dorothy's questions.
Okay, very good. Dorothy submitted another question. Oh, Carol has a comment. Go ahead, Carol.
I want to let our listeners know that there's a series of meetings after these 4 overview meetings. The first one is on energy, May 6th. And the author of the energy chapter, Gregory Schroeder, will give an overview. And we've invited, and Martin Day of the PSC will be on a panel. Tom Content of CUB will be on that panel. And we've got a couple of other invitations out, American Transmission and Renew Energy, and we haven't heard back yet, but there will be a little more in-depth opportunity to ask questions on energy and the energy category in the report card.
Thank you, Carol. This question, Dr. Holland, you showed some reports and made some comments about unemployment and the labor participation rate, if I recall correctly. Does Wisconsin have enough qualified contractors, i.e. laborers, within our state to do the necessary infrastructure upgrades? Care to comment on that question?
The national market has plenty of people that can come here when the demand materializes. And if we're worried that we don't have enough people to fix roads or fix the electric grid or things like that, then that's an area where I think the market works quite well. So we don't have to have them on site at all times. We can, let supply and demand, that's one of the advantages of being a small piece of a very large federal system. So.
Okay. We have another question that's asking, is there a place where I can get Dr. Holohan's explanation of GDP equals spending equation? Both reports were very much appreciated. I'll let Dr. Holohan respond, but I can tell you that the recording of this session and his presentation in entirety will be available on the ASCE Wisconsin section YouTube channel. So it will be easy to find there. But do you have any other references that you would point to, Dr. Holohan?
It's a fairly standard presentation in any macroeconomics textbook, or on Khan Academy is a fabulous resource for people of all ages. KHAN Khan Academy. He has a section on macroeconomics. And of course, on various online courses, MIT has a wide variety of courses online on their open courseware selection, and their macroeconomics is presented there as well. So, could go into it in much more depth than I was able to in the few minutes that I had. So, thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, it is getting to 5 o'clock, and we wanted to respect everyone's time. So I appreciate all the people that asked questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. Before we ask for closing comments from the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, I'd like to ask that you complete a short 20 question. Yeah, you might argue that 20 is not short, but they're quick question. 20 question survey at the conclusion of this webinar. The survey should pop up on your screen when you leave the webinar, and the results of the survey will be used by the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin to plan future events and activities associated with infrastructure in Wisconsin. So to close out the session, I'd like to ask Louise Petering to say a few words. Louise?
Yeah, thank you very much, Marty. And thank you to Carl Sutter, our professional engineer, and Emeritus Professor William Holohan from UW-Milwaukee for their time and bringing their expertise to us today. We appreciate your concerns raised by your questions and have noted them along with your answers to poll questions. If you have further questions, please contact the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin at LWV-WI.org. Next slide, please. As Carol mentioned, there is a category meeting about energy coming up on May the 6th. Before that date, on April 15th, we have a Northeast Quadrant meeting Please do note that these events are scheduled between May the 6th and August the 19th. And you will hear more about those from the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin and the ASCE Wisconsin section. We will, as Carol mentioned, have a professional engineer involved in ASCE's assessment of that particular type of infrastructure involved presenting. And then there will be other professionals reflecting on their perspective, providing their perspective about that particular infrastructure category. Please watch for future messages from both the League and the ASCE Wisconsin section, or go to our websites where information about those will be posted. Thank you again to the planners who helped build out this overview. You see their names here with the companies that they work with. And we very much appreciate all the expertise that they brought to this. And we thank Marty Hansen for managing our technology. Next, please. Thank you to these members of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin who helped plan these meetings. And I thank Carol Diggleman, who you see here on this presentation, who is a member of both the League and the ASCE. Thank you very much for attending and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Louise. A quick reminder to please complete the survey as you exit the webinar. The survey will appear automatically when you leave the meeting, and the recording of this event will be available soon on the ASCE Wisconsin section YouTube channel. Thanks for your participation and have a pleasant evening and be safe.